Since the Pakistanis closed the Torkham border crossing at the Khyber Pass late last week, supply trucks have been stacking up, and they're quite vulnerable to attack. And we've seen these sorts of attacks pretty much daily since the closure. A lot of the attacks are just drive-by shootings. There's nothing really technically or tactically sophisticated about them. But if you have a grenade and a fuel truck, you can cause a mess pretty quickly and pretty easily. We're talking on the order of 100 fuel trucks a day to sustain operations in Afghanistan. But the instability on the Pakistani supply lines is nothing new. There's always been risks. There's always been disruptions. So a delay of a matter of days isn't something that's going to impact operations in any meaningful sense. But there's definitely a concern that this short-term closure, which at this point is hardly unprecedented, could last longer, and that would become an issue. The Pakistanis have insisted that this is about security, and it's about all of the anger in the border areas with the U.S. over this most recent strike where 3 Frontier Corps soldiers were killed by U.S. attack helicopters. The real truth of the matter, though, is that closure is all about U.S. cross-border operations in Pakistan and how they've become much more aggressive of late, not just having unmanned aerial vehicle strikes to reach unprecedented levels, but for cross-border operations and attacks by light aircraft and attack helicopters. They've really sort of crossed a line, and Pakistan has been signaling that this is crossing a line for them for some time. So it's a pretty big issue, and there's a pretty wide gulf between Washington and Islamabad on it. The supply line is protected by private security contractors. But even on a good day, there's always a risk of attack. It's a relatively vulnerable part of the supply chain, especially up in the federally administered tribal areas, basically the stretch from Peshawar to Torkham. This area is where the Taliban can operate with a fair amount of impunity. The security just isn't that tight. We're talking about hundreds of trucks, so as they stack up in the depot, or especially if the border's closed for a couple of days and they stack up along the side of the road, border crossing, they're inherently vulnerable, and they will continue to be vulnerable until not only the border's back open again, but the logjam is cleared. There's a spectrum of actors in the area that have various grievances. Some are dealing with the U.S. and NATO troops in Afghanistan and are attacking the supply lines because of that. Some are more interested in the regime in Islamabad and are, again, carrying out these attacks at the same time because it creates pressure on the regime. At the same time, the supply line issue is one of Islamabad's key pieces of leverage over Washington. So it has some incentive to ensure that there is a low level of militant activity that threatens the supply line that continues to make Pakistani cooperation something that's not taken for granted.